So I am making this video in response to a respectful and relevant comment regarding the fact that I wear Spurs. And I'll paraphrase that comment, which said, "You seem to have really good communication with your horses. Why do you wear Spurs?" That's a fair question. Let me say right now that I anticipate there will be a certain number of people who say Spurs are absolutely abusive, end of story. The same as people say, never put a bit in a horse's mouth, that's just horrible. If you feel that way and you're not going to learn anything, then you better go to one of the more liberal-minded video sites and hear what you want to hear instead of considering what maybe might be useful for you to know. But if you want to come in open-minded, welcome aboard. So, I wear Spurs constantly and use them rarely. If you were to watch, for example, the half a dozen videos we put up of this new mare, Betty, our half draft, I'm wearing Spurs in every video, and with the exception of one instance where I'm using the spur to raise her back up as she backs, you'll not see me touch her with the spur. You can use your legs fine without Spurs, without actually activating the spur. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. So I use Spurs specifically because they can be very useful for communication. They can help you keep your horse's sides responsive, because anything you do repetitively is going to have a desensitizing effect if there isn't some authority to it. So I see people who proudly say, I never wear a spur, but a lot of times they're thumping on their horse's sides, which have become totally dull, like they're testing a watermelon, thumping away, and the horse is just saying, that doesn't mean much to me. I'm used to it and I can ignore it, and if they do anything, they do it very slowly and on their own time. So Spurs help me communicate more convincingly and more precisely. Now, can they be used abusively? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll tell you a story that horrified me, and I'm not that easy to horrify. Back in the early 1980s, I went to a sale and bought a mare who had been a reiner, had been a show horse, but had come from a program that was absolutely noted for being a hard school. I had a friend who wanted a horse they could learn to ride on. This mare had been out having babies for a few years. She was serviceably sound, but she quit getting pregnant. So basically, she had to be a riding horse or just retire, and she was fine to ride. So I bought this mare at the sale, brought her home, wanted to clean her up a little bit before I rode her. I turned the hose on her, and all across both shoulders, you could still, and this is probably 12 years after the fact, you could still see the scars from the spurs that had been used on her shoulders. That's unfortunate. I think it's unnecessary. I don't think we see it much these days. I don't know that I've ever marked a horse with a spur. I don't know that I could with the spurs I use. It's possible, but if they're applied right, you're not going to accidentally hurt your horse. So that's an example, absolutely. Like any other piece of equipment, in the wrong hands, it's bad. So that's somebody who maybe shouldn't have been training horses. He got a lot done, but boy, there was a huge cost to the horses. Maybe you shouldn't use spurs either, and not because you're going to tend to be abusive, but for two reasons. One is, if you do have a temper, it has no place in the training of horses, but if you're having trouble controlling your temper, don't wear spurs, because you can take that tool, make it a weapon, and that's not right. More importantly, there's an awful lot of people who don't have complete control of their body, whose legs slosh around when they move, who don't know when they're touching the horse, and they give lots of unintended cues, and that would include cues with a spur if those people chose to ride with one. So if you don't have control of your body, if you don't have control of your legs, if you don't know when you are and are not applying your leg aids, don't even think about strapping on a set of spurs. There's one comment that I anticipate hearing, and I'm going to address it, because whenever you talk about doing something with a horse that you use a bit of sensitization, we'll call it, they say a horse is so sensitive they can feel a fly land on them. Well, let's unpack that and analyze that a bit. Absolutely, a horse has incredibly sensitive skin and other parts of its body. So yes, a horse can feel a fly on its skin, and they do react. I mean, you'll see them shiver their skin, they'll flag their tail, they'll move away, they'll kick up sometimes if it's a big fly. Absolutely, they'll react to that fly. They feel it, they react. That is a true statement. But we used to have, and we don't see them as much anymore, birds that would come around and they'd sit on our horses' backs. Now they're exponentially hundreds and hundreds or maybe thousands of times bigger than those flies. But while the horse would react to the fly, they didn't react to the bird. The bird would sit up there and the horses would walk around, and the birds, I think, must have been picking some sort of little insects or catching them because the horses drew them. And it was almost like the horses were fine with that, and they were totally desensitized to it. So consider this. Why do they respond to the fly? They respond to the fly not because they're so sensitive, but because the next thing the fly does when he lands on their hip is he bites them on the ass. And that draws a response. So there's a cost to ignoring that fly. If I'm wearing spurs and a horse ignores me, there's a cost, and I will apply a spur, and that will keep me in the position of that fly. Most people are more in the position of those little birds. They're just up there, and the horse sees them as neutral. They're desensitized to that. So you have a situation where basically, yes, they can feel that fly land, but they have an incentive to be attentive. With the bird, it's just something they can ignore. Let's talk a little bit about different types of spurs. You can use a spur that doesn't fit you, and it can cause you trouble. I'm a long-legged, tall guy, and my spurs are cut long and with a rise. So you'll see that. And that allows me to reach up and get to a horse, because very often my heels will be below the horse's belly, so I can reach up like that. If you're shorter, you want a shorter shank spur, or even one that rolls down like a gooseneck, they call them, and that will allow you to reach down and get a hold of your horse if you're real short-legged. The other thing about these spurs is they have a 9-point rowel that is very dull. More points to the rowel, as long as they're not sharp, means more surface area coming in contact with the horse, and they're less aggressive. So these are a 9-point. If you have a 4-point, then sharp, you can dig a hole in a horse for sure. The other thing about these spurs, and I should have brought my other pair out that's older, you can see those rowels, the hole in the rowel is egged out. So the rowels wiggle a bit. That allows you almost the equivalent of a bit of signal in a bit. I don't tie my spurs down, so when I touch a horse, they'll move in against my heel a little bit before they activate. And it gives the horse the chance to comply before there's any price to be paid. And my job is to know when to abort that aid. If the horse is responding, say, okay, you got it, fine. So you want to consider how a spur is used, and we could do a whole separate video easily on using spurs. There are some horses, Like there are some riders who shouldn't wear spurs. There's some horses that just don't need them or where it's counterproductive. You're going to have to call that judgment on your own horse or the horse that you're riding. I had one very good horse, tried real hard, and I was getting ready to show him the next day, and it had rained a lot, so I was out in a parking lot, sort of like what we have here. It's kind of gritty and hard, but it would take the rain. So I thought, well, I'm just going to turn him around a little each way, and you know, I've never ridden this guy with spurs. I'm just going to stick a set of spurs on and tune him a bit. Well, I put a spur against him. I legged him. I thought he was a little dull. I brought my spur into play, and he turned so hard that when I walked away, I looked back, and he had turned right out of his inside hind shoe. I figured that kind of over-try was as bad as a horse that under-tried. I'd never used spurs on him before. I took the spurs off. I never put them on him again. So there are horses that try so hard that you can scare them with spurs. Also, when you use a spur, not to get too far into the technique, but I like to use a spur where I roll it against the horse. Roll it against the horse. And I can tell you on my bare hand, it's totally non-painful, but it's more focal. So if I was to push on a horse with my palm of my hand, that would just be like pushing on a person to try to move them. You want to move somebody, take your finger and push. And it's just enough pressure with that less surface area that they'll feel it and they'll respond better and they'll pay better attention the next time. And that's what spurs are all about. So those are some thoughts on when you use spurs. You don't jab your horse, as I said. You may roll that spur. And you may only use your spur once every couple of rides, but it's nice to have it when you need it. So use your spurs for precision communication. If you're riding at a higher level and you're using spurs, you're like a surgeon. You're being very precise. A surgeon wouldn't use a hatchet. At least I hope not. A hatchet is crude, as is your bare heel. Instead, they use a scalpel, which is precise, which is sharp, which allows things to be done precisely. Now, obviously, a spur doesn't cut like a hatchet or a scalpel, but it allows you a similar level of precision, which is what fine riding's all about. Done right, spurs can help you with finer riding. So that's a long answer to a short, very pertinent, and very respectful question. I welcome comments. The one thing I've found, though, is that people who feel they need to call out abuse, ironically, often do so in abusive comments. I respond to every comment. I've never blocked anybody. I don't want to block anybody. I've never deleted a comment. But if you disagree, let me know you disagree and why. But don't tell me I'm going to burn in hell. If I am, that's on me. You don't need to tell me. So, look forward to hearing from you. And I hope this has given you some thoughts as to why I at least use spurs and maybe led you to think whether you should or shouldn't yourself.